Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, July 20th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the key culture war issues that the Republican Party has been putting forth ahead of the 2021 Virginia gubernatorial race and the 2022 midterm elections. Looking at these important issues on behalf of the Republican Party, they mention critical race theory, and they also mention biological boys, as they put it, competing in girls' sports, specifically relating to transgender individuals on a K through 12 level. So looking at what the American Principles Project has pretty much been trying to push as a narrative, a very openly Republican-funded and Republican and conservative outlet for their American Principles Project, whatever they would like to determine themselves as, this is a right-leaning source. So understand that when we take a look at these breakdowns, and understand when we go further through the video how you can manipulate data points to sort of build your argument and make it seem as if this race is more competitive and that Virginia is more right-leaning than it actually is. I have been very clear in all of my videos about where Virginia stands on the electoral level. Virginia is a state where the Democrats have won in every election on the presidential level since 2004. So 2020 in Virginia, Joe Biden did very, very well, best performing Democrat in over half a century. So for Joe Biden to be up so high, and for this APP spry pollster to try to say that Virginia is undoubtedly a swing state, I do question whether or not that is legitimate. In addition, when I take a look at the way that they are showing these notable results, I will actually show you the actual breakdown, and you will see exactly how it's a little bit different than what they are trying to tell you. The first thing that they note is critical race theory, essentially the understanding that certain things will be left in the American curriculum versus left out. Things that have to do with understanding the way that minority individuals grow up in this country, American history, highlighting the brutal treatment of minority citizens across the United States, essentially ensuring that history is not lost and not watered down by the American education system. Because as someone who went through a public school system my entire life, right after second grade, I was in a Catholic school for a year. Moving on beyond that point, we weren't exactly exposed to much, even though there was discussion about what it meant to be a minority in the past. A lot of things were equated to very harmless things when really they shouldn't have been. And for this to be now in discussion about whether or not certain things should now be removed even further from the curriculum, it does question what wants to be left in it. Now, critical race theory, I think, is something that the American public probably isn't too educated on, which is why I really don't think this is an issue that the GOP should be using as a culture war type of thing. Electorally speaking, it doesn't provide much help in polling data, as we will go into in just a moment. They note that 58% of voters oppose critical race theory being taught in Virginia schools, while only 26% support it. We will take a look at that point. 57% of voters disapprove of policies allowing biological males to compete in girls' K through 12 athletics, while only 23% approve. Again, we will go into that. 44% of voters believe Virginia schools should be fully open without a mask mandate, while 29% believe they should be fully open with mask mandates. They leave out other options for a reason. It's not just a total of around 70% there. No, there are more options that do show that voters are not fully okay with opening without mask mandates. 52% of voters believe the school system are not getting their money's worth out of the Virginia public education system, while only 21% do believe this. While Virginia has one of the best education systems in the nation, of course, it's expensive to live here, especially in the Northern Virginia region, so people might feel as if the taxes that they are paying, the property that they own, is not equivalent to the quality of education that their children are receiving. But amongst all of this, what seems to be the GOP's key issues, critical race theory, where it seems based off of these points that there is a 30-point deficit there amongst transgender individuals in competing in sports K through 12. It seems as if there's a 30-point deficit there. Amongst mask mandates, you're talking a 15-point deficit. Amongst education, whether or not you're getting your money's worth, a 30-point deficit. Yet still, Glenn Youngkin is behind Terry McAuliffe by 5 points. And this is the first question that they ask. Well, not the first one, but one of the very first. Question number 4, if the November 2nd general election for governor was held today, who would you vote for, essentially? And Terry McAuliffe received 46% of the vote, and Glenn Youngkin received 41%, a 5-point difference. Now, as the questions go on, They ask more and more questions about, yes, election, and then they go into the culture war issues that the Republican Party has really been highlighting over the past couple of months. The first one that they ask deals with the reopening for the public school system. It shows here that 45% of people say that schools should be open without mask mandates. Then 29% say they should be open with mask mandates. 1% say schools should be virtual only, and then 25% say parents should choose between virtual learning or in-class learning. But they don't show that in the original data point. It just shows that there is a very big difference between those who want a mask mandate versus those who do not. But given the option, it's sort of just like hybrid learning, where people on this 25% level probably do want mask mandates or probably do support it being there as an option. And also, one thing that I do want to point out is that this poll probably does do a good job at getting the general public in the state of Virginia. The approval rating for Joe Biden across these constituents is 54%. So yes, this race is closer than it will be and was on the 2020 presidential level, but that still doesn't mean much, especially as we go through some of these issues, because I really want to show you exactly whether or not these critical race theory and these culture war comments and arguments are actually effective for the Republican Party, specifically in the state of Virginia, which is supposed to be an indicator for future elections, as 2017 was for 2018, and as 2013 was, with it narrowing up relative to the 2012 election as it was for 2014. So let's go ahead and take a look back at some of these other questions. And then they ask about whether or not they would support Glenn Youngkin for policies and tax shifts, whatever it might be. Then they go into the question about critical race theory. They describe it as an academic discipline based on the concept that race should be taken into consideration for all aspects of Americans' daily lives. Teaches young white children that they are oppressors due to the color of their skin. I mean, look at the way that this question is phrased, right? Look at the way that they describe critical race theory. This is not what it is. As someone who grew up in a predominantly minority county, I can tell you that a lot of my friends, my peers, my educators, even myself, when we move outside of the county, we certainly do face levels of discrimination. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I saw slurs on my own YouTube channel the day that it looked like Donald Trump was going to win the election on November 3rd. Every time I refreshed my final prediction, I can tell you there were probably just a handful of slurs randomly there, and that's the reality of the way that we live. There are people out there, while I'm sure the majority of the country has good intent, there are still bad apples out there. So to treat critical race theory that they teach as if young white children are inherently the oppressors, I mean, it doesn't exactly capture what I think that critical race theory actually is, at least from an unbiased point of view. When you take a look at what's actually trying to be implemented or trying to be continuously implemented within the education system, the way that they describe this really shows that the questioning and the wording of this question is exactly why you see a heavy dislike for it. Had they asked the general question, do you think critical race theory should be taught in Virginia public schools, or they took a standard definition and put it out there, the numbers would be different. But like we saw in the talking about the mask mandates in schools, this pollster in specific does not like to highlight when they aren't in the positive, which is quite interesting to see. They ask, the Democratic candidate for governor refuses to condemn the critical race theory and called it a right-wing conspiracy, despite the fact that it's actively being taught in Virginia public schools. Does this make you more likely or less likely to support Terry McAuliffe? It shows here that just 39% say it's much less likely. I'm assuming these are already Glenn Youngkin voters. 6% say that it shows that they have less likely of a chance to vote for Terry McAuliffe. 10% say it makes them more likely, and then 27% say it makes them much more likely, while 19% really don't care and aren't sure about where they stand on that currently. And then also when they say, Glenn Youngkin supports this, X, Y, and Z, after describing it and making it seem that the Republican candidate seems to be completely opposed to it, it just doesn't even show the numbers that they really need to have for this to be a very important issue. To have just 43% of voters say it makes them much more likely. Again, these are probably voters who already chose Glenn Youngkin in the past. And then 5% say it makes them somewhat more likely. The fact is that they don't even have the majority after phrasing the question in such a way that they would never ever see, these voters would rarely ever see described on terms of the way that the media would describe it, on the way that the Democrats would describe it. What this is essentially is a skewed survey, and it still doesn't show Glenn Youngkin ahead. And we can actually take a look. They question everything else. They ask the question about transgender individuals within these sports. And then they ask, do you support this being an issue within the Virginia K-12 public schools? Do you have a problem with X, Y, and Z? And, they ask that question. They phrase it intentionally. Biologically male students that identify as transgender to participate in girls' sports programs at Virginia K-12 public schools. The public opinion on it in Virginia is different in other polls than it stands here. So it's interesting to see. Again, comes down to phrasing of the question. But for that to be an important issue, we'll wait and see. Is critical race theory an important issue for Virginia voters? Is transgender individuals in sports an issue for Virginia voters that changes the way they look at Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin? Well, we can go back and forth. On this slide here, they question again, after learning everything that you did within this poll, are you more likely, or essentially, who are you likely to vote for now, given that example? First thing, Terry McAuliffe still remains at 46%. Glenn Youngkin jumps up to 43%, but that's not a considerable uptick. After all of these questions, in which it was very clear what the intent was, especially with that critical race theory comment, all it did was boost Glenn Youngkin by 2 points. And Terry McAuliffe remained relatively unscathed, did not move much. And this sort of tells us exactly where this race stands currently. We have seen polls released that show Youngkin behind McAuliffe, all of which are Republican pollsters. These are all purple highlighted because I have shown you every single one of these polls. And it is clear within this data, as much as the American Principles Project would like to have these major deficits here where it seems as if their right-wing agenda is more favored than the left-wing one. First of all, it comes down to the question of how was this phrased? How does this, resonate with Virginia voters? What do they get from such a statement? Where do they look at this? If you are being told, as someone who is answering this poll, that critical race theory, if you didn't know what it was before, and you are being told by supposedly, a trusted pollster, usually speaking, these pollsters aren't going to come out and say, we are right-leaning, we are doing this for the purpose of furthering the American Principles Project. Essentially, what they are doing is quote-unquote educating voters inaccurately about the issue of critical race theory and other issues, and still trying to pass that off as just the way that Virginians stand about current issues. And when you take a look at how that changed the race itself, it didn't. All it did was narrow up the race from a 5-point victory to around a 3-point victory. I said a 2-point victory earlier, but a 3-point victory. It really didn't change much. And for this to have gone through so much, it's not just the standard informing the voters of the issues. They intentionally tried to make it seem worse for the Democrats, made certain issues seem much more detrimental for the left wing of the American public, of the American political system, yet it still did not boost Youngkin the way that I think they thought it would, because Virginia is inherently a blue state. It has enough voters in the Northern Virginia region to completely counteract the rest of the state. And there are pockets around the state that have overwhelming Democratic areas. You're talking Virginia Beach, where I'm actually going down in just a few hours to Virginia Beach. You have, the Richmond area. You have Roanoke. And then, of course, you have the Northern Virginia region, where there are hundreds of thousands of voters who stand at this point backing the Democratic Party overwhelmingly. Alexandria area, Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun County. What's happening in the state of Virginia essentially is that these small blue pockets are driving the rest of the state towards the left, and Youngkin needs to do better than Romney did in these regions. And I can tell you now, that's probably going to be difficult to do. The electoral history in this state of Virginia has not been favorable to Republicans in recent history. Glenn Youngkin has really tried to make this race his, but it doesn't seem as if it's going that way. And for me to see these numbers, for me to present these numbers to you, to show you exactly how ineffective these culture war issues are resonating with voters in Virginia, they probably won't resonate in other states where the GOP wants to be able to make inroads. When they're looking at some of the competitive Senate races in 2022, if it's not working in Virginia, it might not work in other states that maybe weren't as Democratic in 2020, but were still Biden states. It might not work in a state such as New Hampshire, where there's a very crucial Senate election up in 2022. where Biden won by over 7 percentage points. It might not work in Minnesota, where Republicans are vying the gubernatorial election there in 2022, where Biden won by more than 7 points. Or even in narrower races, it might not work in a state such as Michigan, where Biden won by 2.8%, or Georgia, or Arizona, or Nevada, or Colorado. While these culture war issues seem to be helping the GOP incrementally, if the Democrats are starting out with advantages such as Arizona, where Mark Kelly is up against all Republican opponents by double digits now, there's not much the GOP can try to do, and honing in on these issues as their major ones ahead of 2021 and 2022 clearly are not resonating with voters overwhelmingly like they expected. Turning 2022 into an issue about, instead of COVID-19, now they are turning to certain issues that have nothing to do in terms of policy that they really couldn't enact or go ahead and prevent or write up bills, draft bills to go ahead and combat certain issues. Essentially, this is just the standard Democrat versus Republican. Where do you stand on a social issue? And that's what's going to be marking 2022. But for the GOP to use these issues and for the American Principles Project to say that in this statement that it is very clear that Youngkin and Republicans would be smart to continue featuring these issues front and center in the campaign, I don't know where they got that from. They conducted the survey. They saw the narrow gain to a point where Terry McAuliffe was still ahead. I kid you not, still ahead over Glenn Youngkin. For them to say that the Republicans would be smart to continue featuring these issues front and center in the campaign, I don't know who advised that, but it clearly did not work in this poll, and it doesn't seem to be working, especially if they're trying to flaunt these deficits, yet Democrats still run ahead in the state of Virginia on both the governor level and on the House of Delegates level. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2021 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.